Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining me for a solo episode of the Grow Rogue podcast. I wanted to put out this video because with the time of this publication, it's like mid-February, which means we are about halfway through Q1 of 2026. And a lot of the businesses we talked to, they had these really ambitious goals and these well-organized plans for their sales and marketing in 2026. And I'm kind of checking in. How are those going? Do you feel like you are, 20-ish% on the way towards hitting those goals? Do you feel like you're getting the traction? If not, I think I know the reason why. 90% of the sales and marketing goals that I reviewed up until this recording, they were heavily focused on tactics, right? We're doing a lot of things, we're publishing a lot of things, maybe we're doing a lot of outreach, or we've got these really exciting pieces of content, and we're hoping that that is going to help us reach the sales and marketing goals that we've set out for us. Unfortunately, and many businesses tend to find this out right about now, is that hope is not a strategy. And so what I want to do on this video is to talk about some of the reasons why that tactics focused effort and approach isn't exactly working, and what you need to do about it to right the ship before we get any deeper into the year. So with that said, let me jump into a couple of the common mistakes that I see when it comes to sales and marketing strategies that are missing that critical piece. And the piece that it's missing is exactly the understanding of what we need to do and why and where that begins. And this is mistake number one. It is not understanding how customers are actually created. Now, that may sound ridiculous. Of course, we know how customers are created. I don't mean in the abstract, right? They are presented with a product or a service that they need, and they get it approved by their internal, team, their decision-making structure, and then they put in a purchase order or they respond to a proposal or whatever. I mean, what are the actual steps mapped out that have to take place in between a salesperson on our team and a buyer on the client team? What documents, what conversations, what interactions, mapping that all the way from actual purchase and delivery, reverse engineered to first conversation. Understanding exactly what those are, putting them on paper is step one. Understanding how customers are actually created and mapping out those steps will get you a lot more useful knowledge that you can use to build all the other elements of your strategy. But now the question is, how do we actually figure that out? Well, so often sales and marketing sit in their opposite sides of the building and they don't have much interaction with each other. In fact, sometimes it feels like they're speaking different languages. And marketing comes up with a whole bunch of great ideas that in theory should help sales. And over on the sales side of the house, they're talking about all the things that they know they need in order to close deals. Meanwhile, those conversations are not happening across the aisle, right? There's no discussion in between sales and marketing leaders and sales and marketing teams, more importantly, so that there can be the discussion of, hey, we really feel like, over here on sales, that if we had this type of content or collateral, it would help us at this particular stage. And we can all look up at the screen or a board and say, yeah, right here in this map of the customer journey, this is when I usually get asked about XYZ information. And it takes me forever to supply it if I even have all the information at hand. And meanwhile, with 150 salespeople, they're all trying to figure this out on their own. Some of them do it well, some of them not so much. And so there's this very discombobulated, not systems-driven process for that stage of the sales journey. And so that gives us a place to say, hey, marketing, there's a task for you. That's a tactic that we need to put on the big to-do list. And on the other side, going the other way, when marketing is trying to create content, they can say, hey, we believe that we need to do these things to increase, let's say, top of the funnel website traffic. We could really use this information from the sales team that would help us to understand in much more detail and much more depth how to create content that would be useful for the rest of the team. That's one thing that if you solve that and you stop watching the video right here, you're going to make a huge leap forward and a ton of progress towards those sales and marketing alignment efforts. All right, so now that we've got sales and marketing teams actually talking to each other, how do we then put that on paper, put that into a plan so that we're always working on the right things and the most useful things? Well, there has to be somebody that owns that particular plan. What we find out is that if two people own something, nobody actually does, because they're always looking and assuming that the other person's doing it, or maybe there's some concern that, oh, I don't want to step on anyone's toes, and so they don't do certain things. So you want to make sure that there's one person who's responsible for facilitating the necessary conversations. Maybe somebody else can take the notes, but ultimately that one person needs to be in charge of making sure all of those different steps actually get done. Now we got to go decide, okay, what do we actually make now that we've figured out we need a piece of content? That's when marketing really gets to step up and shine, especially if you've got a true creative marketing leader who can say, all right, sales says that they need case studies. Well, how can we craft case studies in a way that is compelling and is interesting and gets people to actually download or request the case study and then actually complete it, so that when they speak with sales, they've already gotten that context and that background, and they're excited to find out how your product or service can solve their problem. So we want to sit down as a marketing team and figure out the biggest challenge and the biggest frustration that, in this case, the customer that we're using for the case study material and any potential customer within a specific segment or industry focus, or however you break things down, what's the biggest problem that they have that our product or service solves, right? We need to make that really, really evident that in the case study example, that this particular customer was experiencing that in a big way, in a really, really deeply painful way. And then we need to present how their relationship with us, doing business with us, made that problem go away. And we want to make sure that we're using things like video, like really, really great looking visuals and really nicely written copy. Explains that in a way that clarifies and that educates a reader or a viewer on, hey, that could work for me. I see how and why that worked for that other customer, that other business that looks like ours. I can see that working for me. And then, of course, we need to make sure that all that content is appropriately pointing to a next step or a call to action. And so now that we've mapped out the customer journey, we've had the discussions between sales and marketing to understand where marketing could support sales, and marketing is getting the information from sales that they need to create the content. Then we've actually outlined what content needs to be created. The next step is that we need to figure out how to actually create the content. Now, I mean tactically create the content. What resources do we need? Do we need a videographer? Do we need a copywriter? Do we need graphic designers? Do we need social media managers? We need to make sure that either our existing team can do those things, or that we have the external resources to be able to get those things done. This is another area where you'll want to have one person who's responsible for coordinating all those various resources so that they can do the work that they need to do. Because they'll have the information, they'll have the background, they'll have the context. Now they just have to make it look good. And this is where a lot of people confuse marketing and content creation, right? I've seen a ton of marketing teams that are full of super talented individuals who can make cool stuff, right? And that's usually what gets thrown out there as marketing. It's cool stuff. But if you've given them all of that background and all of that information and that plan and that overview and outline, then they can use their cool stuff making capabilities to make the right stuff and make it look good and make it look cool and all those fun things. So now we're creating content. And this can get very tactical, right? This part of the video. So I won't go into too much detail, but obviously you'll want to make sure that there's a quality control process, that between that one person who owns this strategy and those individuals who are creating the stuff, that it is routinely checked and reviewed, and there's feedback given to make sure that, yes, this addresses what we really feel like is needed to support sales and to support the greater marketing strategy, that we're not missing things. Sometimes creatives are a little less detail oriented than your more left brain project manager types, and that's okay. That's why we work together. But having somebody to own that, quality check that, and frankly, be the one to say, hey, this looks good, this is done. That's another downside sometimes of working with creatives, ultra creative people. They tend to sometimes have a perfectionist streak to them. So a person who's deadline driven and can say, hey, look, you may be able to make that more perfect, but it needs to be done in 2 days because we've got a schedule to keep. That's very, very important. And that brings me to the final piece. And this is another piece that tends to get conflated or falsely described as, that's what marketing is. And it's the distribution piece. Now we got to actually put stuff out in the world and get our marketing into the hands and in front of people that can do business with us. And this is where we talk about, finally, we're talking about things like social media marketing, email marketing, SEO, AGO or AEO, when we're talking about artificial intelligence tools and chat GPT and all that kind of stuff, and getting our content to show up in front of the right people. You'll notice that most marketing conversations start with those things. That's not the right way to go. That's sort of the last step, is figuring out things like a content calendar, a distribution schedule, who's going to be posting what, when do emails go out, how often do they go out. Those things are very, very important once we've determined what content needs to be created, why it needs to be created, how it's going to help us get more marketing qualified, sales qualified leads and opportunities, right? Now we build that process out. This might be something that those various creatives can get done, right? A social media manager or a content creator or a graphic designer or a videographer probably has all the necessary skills to publish content on those various platforms. Maybe it needs to pass to somebody else purely for bandwidth reasons, or just because those people may be, tasked with something else. It doesn't really matter, again, as long as there is one person who owns that content calendar and the distribution schedule. And so we've got that now into the hands of the person who's going to hit go or hit publish or hit send, maybe using HubSpot, maybe using Buffer or whatever the tool is. There needs to be somebody that is in charge and responsible for making sure those tools work. Now, that's another topic that can become an entire video. It's how to use those tools. But for the purposes of this discussion, we are not going into too much detail there. So now here's what we've put together, right? We started with how customers are actually created. We then go to, well, what is needed to help those customers actually be created or to help sales move a prospect through that pipeline? Then what content needs to actually be built so that the sales team can use that particular content and help them move through the sales pipeline. And then finally, we put together the distribution strategy for getting that content out into the world and into the various marketing technology channels and all those kinds of things, so that we have this nice efficient machine of idea to content creation to distribution and all the way through the process. Here's the thing. I listed off a whole lot of different people that are needed to make this work. And admittedly, we're talking about a little bit larger teams. That's usually who we're working with, right? Sales teams of a few dozen to a few hundred, marketing teams from anywhere from 6 or 8 people to 20 or 30 people. There can be a lot of people involved in this. But if you've got that one person who can competently and confidently lead strategy, and then you've got that person who can confidently and competently track and measure and make sure all of the necessary work is getting done, then you can organize and arrange all those different people in the proper way so that you get the results that you want from ultimately top line revenue growth this year. If you don't feel super confident that you have all of that knowledge behind your sales and marketing strategy for the year, it's not too late, but it is important that you figure that out soon. Our agency, Rogue Pine, specializes in this. We have several methods and programs for getting this understanding, getting this knowledge, building these plans, and either helping teams execute this on their own or actually building out and running these systems on behalf of our clients. If that's something that you'd like our help with, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation. It's as simple as that. Let's just talk. Let's figure out what you actually need and if we can help. If not, we're going to give you a ton of resources and recommendations so that you can do that job super well with all the resources that you have. And if we can help you, that's great. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. If you enjoyed this, if you got something from this, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, or just send this to a friend or a colleague that may be thinking that they're not really excited about the progress they're making towards their sales and marketing goals so far in the year. I thank you all for joining me. I'm really excited to do the next podcast. Make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss any, and I will see you on the next episode of the Grow Rogue podcast. Thank you.